Hello, and welcome to this episode of Masterclass from the European Covenant of Companies for Climate and Energy. I'm Avadipto Biswas from ThinkE, and we are a part of this Covenant of Companies. Today's topic is adopting solar photovoltaics. In this, we'll talk about three key aspects. Firstly, the motivation. Why should we care to adopt solar PV? Hopefully, once we have been able to convince you, we will then go to the important considerations that we must take into account before deciding on taking up a project of our own. Finally, we'll move to the implementation stage, where we will discuss the key aspects that we must take into consideration during the implementation phase itself. Having said that, let's dive in. So the primary driver for solar PVs is environmental sustainability. As you know, that global warming is a major concern these days. Scientists have been warning that if the temperature increases by more than 1.5 to 2 degrees centigrade above the pre-industrial era, the consequences are catastrophic. Last year, we already reached that 1 degree mark. So we must act today to ensure a sustainable future. However, it never works out until the economics of the process aligns itself with our motivations. And what we are claiming here is that there are substantial benefits, economic benefits to be reaped by adopting solar PVs. Thanks to research and development and scaled up manufacturing, the cost of solar PVs have come down significantly over the last 10 years, making it competitive with the conventional sources of electricity generation. Finally, if more and more people take up this technology, it also improves our energy security, provided that there is a collective action. And we will discuss this in greater details in the next few slides. So talking about sustainability, so electricity is a form of energy that is derived from other primary sources of energy that we find in nature. In this image, you can see 8 different primary sources of energy. You have fossil fuels, you have renewable energy, and then you have nuclear energy as well. Fossil fuels today account for about 40% of European electricity system. Now, depending upon which primary energy source and which technology you're using to generate the electricity, you may have different carbon footprints. It's not uniform everywhere, even within Europe, and it can depend on the region and the generator as well. So coal today contributes to about 16% of European electricity, with about 800 to 1200 grams per kilowatt hour carbon emissions. Oil has a similar carbon footprint, but it has a much lower contribution to electricity system, about 3%. It is still substantial. Natural gas, on the other hand, contributes to about a fifth of the European electricity generation, though its carbon footprint is much lower as compared to coal and oil, but it's still pretty significant at 400 to 600 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. Then you have nuclear energy, which contributes to another about 1/5 of European electricity system and has a very low carbon footprint of 5 to 10 grams of CO2 per unit of electricity. Hydro has about 11%, wind at about 16%, have a carbon footprint of roughly 10 to 20 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. Now, you may be wondering that how come nuclear or hydro or wind have any carbon footprint at all? It is because it's not just the generation operations itself, but it also includes all kinds of ancillary services and construction and all associated activities as well. The same thing goes for solar as well. The solar generation, electricity generation itself is carbon free, but the solar PVs, the um, infrastructure has a carbon footprint itself. It's about 25 to 50 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour, a bit higher than nuclear, hydro, and wind, but still significantly less than any of the fossil fuel uh, sources. Biomass is considered renewable. It has substantially higher carbon footprint of 250 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour, but still much lower than the other fossil fuels. Now, there's a specific reason why there's so much focus on um, solar uh, energy, even though wind and hydro have a much lower carbon footprint. All the other technologies are utility scale technologies. That is, these are large scale generators um, that can actually implement these technologies. We at the individual scale can do very little except for pushing policies, pressurizing our politicians to actually adopt policies that are environmental friendly, and that in effect pushes the generators. But solar technology is the only one that can be used both at the utility scale and at our individual scale. So there's a lot we can do in terms of adopting solar PVs that in a way will increase this 8% contribution to a higher percentage, a much higher percentage, and thus effectively decarbonizing the electricity system by our individual actions. Now, let's see the energy security dimension. The first is diversification. Now, what do we mean by diversification? We have multiple sources, as you saw in the previous slide. Some of them contribute to more electricity production, and others not so much. You want to have, at any region, you want to have a diversified contribution so that if in case you take out one of the electricity generation systems, it does not lead to a blackout. So let's say today, for some reason, the gas generator goes out, then it's going to put a lot of pressure on the electricity system. However, if if wind and solar also pick up in the percentage, so even if one generator goes out or one source goes out, you still have significant electricity contribution from the others. The decentralization concept is also very similar. Instead of diversifying in terms of primary energy sources of electricity, we talk about point of production. So you don't want a single large producer, because if that goes out, it creates a lot of stress on the electricity grid, and you are not going to be able to have an effective supply of electricity. Instead, if you have a distributed system where there are a large number of producers, large number of small producers, let's say, then even if one goes out, then two things happen. Firstly, it does not affect the society at large. And secondly, uh, it is easier for other producers to actually compensate for the loss of a single source or single producer. The third component is energy independence. Now, we all know that Europe actually is dependent to a large extent on North America, previously Russia, and the Middle East for its oil and gas supply. So anytime there is an issue, geopolitical or natural, in the global market of fossil fuels, you have issues that directly cause concerns in the electricity market. And a good example for that is the 2021-2022 energy crisis in Europe. Because of lower gas supply, because of the Russia-Ukraine war, Europe had concerns about gas supply, and the price for gas significantly shot up within a very quick period of time. That led to extremely high electricity prices as well in Europe. To avoid a situation like that, it is important that Europe is able to produce electricity locally based on resources that are available locally and are in control. Renewable energy, like solar, is a perfect example that can solve these issues. And Europe has significant scope of growth in terms of solar electricity. The last point on energy security is water usage. This is not very frequently talked about, but it is becoming a growingly important concern. As we all know that globally we have issues with water scarcity. It's a growing problem, and all the other sources of electricity generation actually have a very significant water footprint. That is, they use a significant volume of water to produce a kilowatt hour of electricity. Whereas solar PVs have no use for water, except for you may need to clean the solar panels once in a while, which is very light in terms of water requirement as compared to, let's say, any of the fossil fuel generations or even hydro generation. Lastly, which is very important, looking at the economic benefits. Now, there are multiple benefits, and they're all kind of connected to each other. So let's go by this one by one. If you have your own production of solar-based electricity, the first thing that happens is you consume less electricity from the grid. So normally, all of us are pulling electricity from the grid, but if we are generating our own, we automatically consume less from the grid. So that means that we will be paying less for the energy that we are consuming from the utility scale grids. Now, the other advantage is that you also pay less for the transmission and distribution cost. If you look at your electricity bill, there are various components to it. Primarily, you pay for the energy cost itself. Secondly, you pay for the transmission and distribution cost, which depends on where you are. The mechanism of levying this cost is different from one country to another country, one market to another market. Typically, the simplest way is they usually levy as a percentage of your energy consumption cost. So as your energy consumption from the grid goes down, your transmission and distribution cost also goes down. The third is the cost value proposition. Now, I mentioned earlier that the costs have been driven by a large fraction, making them competitive with the conventional sources. So what has in effect happened is it has shifted high on value but low on cost. So it is really a good monetary proposal to have your own solar PV now these days. And it's a low-hanging fruit because the government is actually incentivizing the adoption of solar PVs. Most governments are either at the national scale or at the regional level. They are providing different kind of incentives to adopt solar PVs. So you must look at that and decide that how much you can actually save over a longer period of time if you adopt this technology. Next, we come to CO2 costs. Now, today, we may not see it directly when we consume electricity, but you may have all heard of energy trading system or ETS implemented in Europe. And the idea is that the government levies a charge on industries for emitting CO2, and they have put a cap, and they are reducing how much you can release every year. And every ton of CO2 being released is charged a certain tax based on the intensity. Now, this cap is designed to be reduced year by year, and this price is actually driven by a market mechanism. So today we don't directly see it, but in the near future, you may expect that this CO2 cost will be quite high. And at some point, the electricity generators may, if they're not able to pull their CO2 emission down, they may be forced to actually pass on this cost, at least a part of this cost, to the end consumers. If you want to avoid this situation, it's best to actually wean off to some extent from the grid, fossil fuel based grid electricity, and move towards greener sources. There are a number of other benefits as well, economic benefits of adopting solar PV. One is you can actually trade the electricity that you generate, what is commonly known as peer-to-peer trading. That is, in your energy community, with your neighbors, you can actually trade this electricity, thus monetizing your investment. Next, you can actually, once you actually implement such projects, your real estate value or the property value also goes up. Lastly, I talked about this in the previous slide. It actually screens you off from the global energy market volatilities. So as I talked about 21-22 energy crisis, the gas prices went up and electricity prices also went up. So if you are completely dependent on the grid, you see these fluctuations affecting your electricity bills. However, if you are generating your own electricity locally from solar PV, you are screened off from those fluctuations for the part that you're producing yourself. So these are the various aspects of economic benefits, and they are all connected to each other. But overall, today, it is a really good proposition to actually look into it seriously, to have your own generation. The European government across all member states are incentivizing it, and it's probably a good time to take advantage of it as well. Now, moving on to the next part of the presentation. That is, once you have decided that it's a good idea, what do you really need to consider before you jump into a project of your own? So the first thing you need to know is what type of solar PVs are there? What kind do you want to buy? Next, you need to know what is your need. You have to assess it carefully to decide what scale of project you need to implement. Third, your solar potential. Of course, it differs from place to place, region to region. It's not uniform all across Europe. So you need to know what exactly is your situation or the situation of your region. Based on your solar potential, based on the need, and based on the type of PV you have decided to go with, you have to decide on the sizing, because the efficiency depends on the type and how much energy is falling on solar energy you are receiving. Based on all these aspects, you have to decide what is the size of net size of solar PV that you must have to meet your requirements. Now, for the advanced users, they will also look into storage assessment, because now you can also store electricity when it is cheap and then use it at a later time. And finally, for the most advanced use cases, you have energy community. Now, this is something that is highly being driven by policies across Europe, forming energy communities that actually trade energy, locally produced energy within the community. There are different definitions based on where you are. So we will discuss this in a later slide, but that's the most advanced use case. So we'll start looking at this pyramid from bottom up. So the first thing, what type of solar PVs are there? There are two different categories. One is you can think of solar PVs in terms of the material itself, like what it is made of. And the other aspect is the design concept. So normally, if you look around, what you will find are the flat panels or modules of solar PVs. And that too, you'll specifically see either blue or black solar PVs. And the reason for that is all those are crystalline silicon. And the reason you mostly see these around is because they form 95% of the market, today's market share. The black solar panels that you see around are monocrystalline silicon, and the blue ones that you see around are polycrystalline silicon. And together they form about 95% of the market share. However, if you Google about solar PVs, you will see a large number of technologies, and um, and you may get a bit confused. But there are two broad categories. One is the crystalline silicon, and the other one is thin film. So we already talked about the crystalline silicon. Now, within thin film, you have various technologies. Again, like you have amorphous silicon, cadmium telluride, copper indium, gallium selenide, which is commonly known as a CIGS, and then you have gallium arsenide. These together, the thin film um, segment forms about 5%, remaining 5% of the market share, with cadmium telluride being the most common in this section. Then you have a third category, or the third generation of solar PVs based on material. And typically you will see perovskite, organic, dye-sensitized, copper, zinc, tin, sulfide type of solar PVs that are really new in the commercial scale. They are yet to penetrate into the market share to have in the market to have a significant share, but these are commercially available, and a lot of research is going on to make them to improve them as well. So these are the material-based categorization of solar PVs. Now also you have design-based. As I said, the normal design is the flat modular panels that you see around, but then we have that absorb um, solar energy on a single surface. Now you have bifacial designs as well these days that have the capability of absorbing solar energy on both sides, and hence give you a greater efficiency of conversion to electricity. Then you have multi-junction PVs as well, which are effectively a sandwich of more than one type of these material-based um, uh, technologies that we just talked about. And the sandwich is done in a way that they give you much higher efficiency than any of these single type of PVs. And lastly, you have concentrator PVs, which are more relevant for utility scale, in which you have some sort of mirror that actually concentrates light in a very small region of solar PVs that are typically multi-junction, high efficiency, expensive multi-junction PVs. And as a result, they give you a much higher efficiency. But these are more for the utility scale. So now, moving on, let's talk about the needs assessment. Needs assessment has two components. One is your current, and one is taking into account your future needs. So let's talk about the current one. Your current energy consumption or electricity consumption has two important key aspects. One is the energy that you consume, the net amount of energy or electricity you're consuming. And the other one is the power that you need, the power consumption, which is basically the kilowatts. So one is kilowatt hour, that's the energy, and then the other is kilowatts. So kilowatts consumption, the capacity consumption, it depends on how many devices, appliances, machines you're using at one particular time. Whereas the energy consumption is both uh, how much power you are consuming at any given point of time and taking the time of use into consideration as well. So when you are planning to have your own solar PV installation, you have to take both these things into account. So let's say you use a particular heavy machinery that has a very high load requirement. You cannot probably have a very small capacity solar PV, even though you are in a very sunny region, maybe it's very efficient, but unless and until it is able to deliver that kind of power, you will not be able to use it suitably. The third important aspect is the financial analysis now. So you have to look at the market to figure out the cost of the type of solar PV you are interested in. You need to look at your load profile. You need to look at your electricity consumption distribution, and then do a basic analysis, financial calculation of what kind of solar capacity do you need, what kind of size do you need, and things like that. Another differentiator is the time of use. If you are somebody who uses a lot of electricity during daytime, you will have, as compared to nighttime, you have a different financial analysis. Whereas if you are a heavy user at night, you may have a very different result from your financial analysis. And the reason for that is in most of Europe, it again depends on where exactly you are, but in most of Europe, the electricity prices from the grid are differentiated by time of use, because if you are using electricity when the consumption, the social consumption is already very high, then you pay more for that unit of electricity as compared to another time when production is high and generation and utilization is low. So you have to take into account all these aspects before you decide on what kind of solar PV installation you need. When deciding this, you also have to take the future into account. So maybe today you use a natural gas heater, but you're thinking that in a year or two, you'll move to a heat pump, which is driven by electricity. So you should consider these kind of aspects into your calculation today. So this typical example that I gave you will fall under like what is commonly called electrification, where you basically switch from one for any given application, you switch from one source of energy towards electricity. The other thing is expansion, of course. You may be thinking of increasing the buying new appliances, new machineries. You may be planning to expand your business, and accordingly, you have to take your solar project into account. I mean, you have to take these things into account when you calculate how much solar capacity do you need. Next, let's look into the solar potential. So one of the best and first sites to look at is the global solaratlas.info. This was a project funded by the World Bank and done in collaboration with SMAP and Solargis. What they did was they mapped the entire world for the solar irradiation that it receives. Now here, in this map, you can see that you have the European map, and you can clearly see that Southern Europe places like Spain or Italy or Turkey, they receive much higher solar energy as compared to Northern Europe. Now you can choose your specific location. Let's say here I have chosen Belgium, and for that particular area, you can in fact go further at a much more granular level. Let's say I've here put it on top of a building, and then I can decide that, okay, what kind of PV system do I want? Here I have chosen a medium-sized commercial PV. Um, and you have choice. You can choose small residential or ground mounted large scale. So you have basically four different choices for the scale you're looking at. But here for our purpose, I've chosen a medium sized commercial scale. And in that, you choose what is your installed capacity. So here I've chosen 50 kilowatts. And for 50 kilowatts, it then gives you what is your annual average production per year for that given region, for that specific location, based on how much energy it actually receives and how much are you going to generate per meter square. So based on these numbers, you can roughly get an idea about what size of solar PV you may need. It gives you, so when you're looking at solar potential, there are three different things you need to take into account. The first thing is geographical location and climate. This is something we just talked about. Like, it gives, from the map you get a basic idea about how much solar energy is irradiated in your location, and given a particular power of solar PV, like given a given capacity, what is your annual average of energy that you can produce? Um, but then you also need to look at, like for your specific building and your specific area, you need to look at orientation and shading, because this may not be so well captured under this project. So let's say you have a very tall building right next to yours that actually guards the solar ray and shadows it. So you will never reach these numbers. So you have to take that into account, because this particular website may not be the most suited. It may not have the most um, granular information to give those things into account, and that is where during the implementation phase, your service provider will be able to give you all those details. In fact, you may also consult your local government websites, where they may have a much better mapping done at the granular level to give you more specific information. However, this is a good start. The Global Solar Atlas is a good start. And then you can go more granular with the local level websites. Another key aspect is your rooftop condition, because not all roof types can I mean, support all kinds of solar PVs in terms of sizing and weight consideration. So you also have to know the structural condition of your roof and how much can it take, and what are the electricity system, like system that it can integrate. So these are the three key aspects. Now, from this Global Solar Atlas itself, you can know two other very key important information. What is now this 1255 that you see here, this is the kilowatt hour uh, per meter square per year. And this is the total that you should be able to generate over the year. But that doesn't mean that you are going to have a uniform distribution all across the year. So summers will typically produce much more than winters. So you typically get a bell-shaped curve like this. So you know that in summer, you are going to produce much more energy, and typically what should be your expectation. That kind of information you can get the monthly averages. Not only the monthly averages, as you can see in this figure, you can get an average hourly profile as well, based on the typical sunrise, sunset, the solar irradiation data for your region. So it gives you month-wise and time of day-wise distribution for what is your energy potential, solar potential of your area. So based on this data, you can actually estimate well what kind of capacity do you need. Once you have that information, then I suggest you go to the local government websites to find if you have more granular mapping done at the local level, um, and revise these calculations to have a better idea. So once you have all this information, now let's look at how the efficiencies have evolved over time, what you need to know about efficiency and sizing. So let's talk about efficiency first. If you look at any website, you will find a wide array of information. There's something called the cell efficiency, and then there's something called the modular efficiency. First and foremost, these two are different. A cell is typically the small squares you will see within a panel. So that is typically the area of each cell is 1 to 300 centimeters squared, depending upon what kind of technology you're going for. For example, crystalline silicon will have a very different cell size than as compared to, let's say, cadmium telluride technology. Then a lot of these cells kind of are packed together to form a module. And that's typically a flat panel, a piece of flat panel that you see. And the modules typically have an area of 800 to 24,000 centimeters square. Again, depending upon the technology, the type of solar PV you're talking about. And then you have a lab scale efficiency, which is basically under very controlled environment, what scientists have observed and reported. And then you have the actual efficiency that you get on the ground, which is typically much lower. So what you need to keep in mind is when you see a cell efficiency being reported, you should know that the modular efficiency is typically 10 to 30% lower than the cell efficiency. So typically, a crystalline silicon based solar PV has a modular efficiency of 17 to 23% currently, and it can generate, one module can generate about 300 to 700 watts. Um, and the P is basically stands for peak. So basically, this is the peak wattage, assuming that like everything works fine. This is the maximum you can get. Comparatively, a cadmium telluride has slightly lower modular efficiency, and it can generate about 400 to 500 watts per module. And the SIGs, which is basically copper indium gallium selenide that we talked about earlier, has further lower efficiency. And these are also smaller in size, module size, and it provides 100 to 200 watts. One thing that you should bear in mind is these areas are also different. When I talk about modular nominal power, it does not mean that they are comparing the same size. The size of a SIGS um, module is usually much smaller than, let's say, a silicon module. So that is something you should bear in mind. So these numbers are not directly comparable per unit area. So yeah. Now, there's another key term that you must know, that is the performance ratio. It's basically the ratio of actual delivered um, uh, energy to the meter versus theoretically what it should. So normally, if you expect, I mean, this is something that I have tried to illustrate in this diagram. So normally, if you are plotting theoretical versus actual, you should expect a straight line, 45-degree straight line. So basically, you are delivering your system is delivering at the meter exactly the same amount as theoretically possible. And the theoretical value includes the solar irradiation, the modular efficiency, and everything taken into account. But in reality, you do not get it. In reality, what is delivered at the meter, the usable energy, is much lower than what you should be getting theoretically. In the 1990s, it used to be 70%. This ratio used to be 70%. So 30% used to be lost in performance value. Um, in Currently in the 2020s, this has jumped up to about 83%. So the loss of energy at the meter, delivered at the meter, has gone down from 30% to 17%. And hopefully this will improve over time. Another thing that you should bear in mind is earlier you used to have a large scatter. So like some kind of solar panels will actually at times, like even a single kind of solar panel at certain times can have let's say 70%, and the same solar panel at a different time or different region can give you a much lower as well performance ratio, or sometimes higher than 70%. So there used to be a huge scatter in their performance, but now the scatter has gone down significantly. So no matter where you are, no matter what technology you're using, you can expect it to be the performance ratio to be closely bound to whatever the stated value is or the expected value is, which currently stands at about 83%. Okay, so there are few other considerations when it comes to sizing. So previously the previous slide, we talked mostly about efficiency. Now, based on the need and the efficiency, you have to now calculate your size. Now, once you have calculated the size, there are some other considerations, like can your roof actually handle that kind of weight? This is something first you have to keep in mind. If it can, then good and fine. If it cannot, you can actually look into the neighborhood rooftop space as well. And the regulation for this changes from one place to another depending upon which region you're from. So you can look into that. There are specific regulations laid out for that. Um, Currently, most of the PVs are actually first generation, like first life PVs. That is like you buy brand new solar PVs. But as we move on, as the technology is getting matured, and as like the time of utilization has basically increased over, let's say, last few years, so people also like once they have served their first life, these things are either recycled or repurposed. Now, this is opening up the space for second life PV modules, just like phones. Like you can, once you're done with a phone, you either basically throw it for recycling, or you can also return it back to the companies who kind of refurbish it and then sell it again in the market at a much lower cost. So when you're doing your financial calculation, you should also look at the second life PV modules, which are expectedly much cheaper than buying brand new PVs. But they may also have different performance characteristics. So you have to take those things into account. The second life PV modules, the market is limited as of now, but it is expected to grow as um, uh, more and more solar PVs flood the market. Um, then you must know your regulatory and permitting requirements, what is allowed in your building, what kind of electricity and grid connection is allowed, because depending upon your utility provider and your DSO, you may have different regulations, how you are billed for the energy that you're using, how you're billed for the energy that you're locally producing and then injecting it into the grid. So there can be various considerations, and that is differentiated from member state to member state, region to region. So again, this is an information that you must have before you decide on your project. And finally, um, you need to know that if you have a certain usage over the day, um, what fraction of it are you actually going to reduce through your solar PV generation? For example, two people can have very different choices. Somebody may decide that they want absolutely their base load to be covered by solar PV. So whatever the additional load or energy usage is, I mean, they have during peak hours, that will be compensated by the grid electricity. Somebody else may take a position where they decide that they're going to have solar PVs that actually covers them for their peak usage. So when they have sub-peak usage, so they're generating probably more than uh, uh, what they're using at those times, they are going to be actually injecting that into the grid or effectively selling that energy produced either to the uh, I mean, either to the aggregator or to the DSO, effectively through the utility or through your energy community. So these are all the um, considerations that you must have before you decide on the size of the project. Now, the good news is you don't have to do these things all by yourself. When you decide on a project, the developer who you hire to actually implement the project, uh, that company is actually going to do all these things for you, but it's very important for you know to understand for you to know and have some basic idea and understand these various aspects so that you can actually have a fruitful discussion and a much more valuable you get the maximum value out of this conversation with your project developer. Now, for the advanced users, you are going to look at the storage assessment. So, first of all, of course, you need to um, have a need assessment done. So, in terms of that, what is your primary motivation to have the storage? Are you trying to shift your load? That means, like, you may have a certain peak and you may not have sufficient solar PV generation at that time, and you will compensate for that from your stored energy in the battery. So you may have stored energy during oversupply or over generation period where you have not utilized all the energy or electricity that you have produced locally, and you have stored it in your battery. And at times when when your demand peaks, you're going to partly use the stored energy. So effectively, you're shifting the load that you're using either from your solar generation or from the grid through the battery. So that can be your primary interest. Your primary interest could also be as a backup power. You really don't care about load shifting so much, although that happens automatic. Like that's a natural way to think about it, but it may not be your primary purpose. Your primary purpose may be you just want to have a backup power source in case you have, let's say, a number of rainy gray days. Um, that is another one. Then your third category is you may be more interested in actually producing more and do trading. So if you're interested in local trading of the electricity that you've produced, then that is a separate kind of thought process that you need to assess. Finally, all these things are managed much better if you have an energy management and control systems, which actually handles these things digitally. So you can program these things in a way that actually optimizes the system for your specific interest and application. Now, when considering a battery, you have to look at the battery specifications. The primary specifications are in terms of energy capacity and load capacity. So how much load or power can your battery deliver? That is one consideration. And the other consideration is the energy it can actually serve. Both these are important, as we have discussed in the past, because you need to be covered um, from a capacity point of view, how much load can your battery survive or provide? And the second is for how long can it keep providing that power for? So that's also uh, important. So both these things are in capacity. And then you have to take into consideration what is the charging, discharging performance as well, like what is the lifetime and how quickly it charges and uh, aspects around it. In terms of technology, the most common one these days is either lithium-based or lead acid. The lead acid technology has been there for a while. It's much older and still very much used for home purposes. For slightly bigger purposes, or even for home purposes, these days lithium-ion-based batteries are more common, getting more common. Um, Now, within the lithium-ion based batteries, you have more and more second life batteries coming in from heavy vehicles. Let's say batteries that are used in heavy vehicles like trucks and buses, they're often being used in their second life for residential static purposes. So you need to know what the market price for those are, and not just what the prices are today, but also like how they may evolve over the next few years. Um, Having a comprehensive understanding of this will help you to make the most um, financially prudent decision. And lastly, flow batteries, they are still under research and development, but they have also started to be commercialized. Um, they are being projected as the next generation batteries and hold a very high promise. But as of today, lithium-ion batteries are still very much popular. Um, Now, for more advanced users, they may want to actually look at the secondary specifications for the battery, which is basically energy density and specific energy. It gives you the footprint of the battery, how big the battery is going to be. So this is nothing but energy per unit volume of the battery or energy per unit mass of the battery. So it gives you an idea about how heavy and how spacious your battery is going to be. And then operating temperature is another key aspect. Like different batteries actually operate, they have a window of optimal performance. So if it gets too hot or too cold in your region, depending upon where you are, you may have to choose your batteries accordingly, because not all batteries are made for covering the extreme weather conditions. And lastly, which is a bit more technical, you may want to look at the battery life in terms of like the various batteries have various degradation mechanisms. They swell over time. The way they need the maintenance also differs depending upon battery to battery. So those things also need to be looked at. But as I said earlier, a lot of these things are quite standardized for your specific applications. You may not need to know all the details when you are actually shopping for one. But if you're really interested, you may want to look into these aspects. And as I said earlier, for the most advanced users who have a very good understanding of all these aspects, they may want to consider how to participate in energy communities, which is gaining momentum these days, mostly incentivized by the local governments and even national governments. Um, so, an energy community is basically a group of individuals or households or even businesses in a given specific locality or region. Now, this area, how big of an area it can be, it differs across Europe. Like it depends on country to country how they define an energy community. So, but given that in that area, you can actually trade energy amongst yourselves. So the idea is to optimize locally to put the least uh, stress on the grid. Um, and the primary focus here is actually on sustainability. Like pretty much the entire Europe is talking about it to promote sustainability. And because we are talking about sustainability, it has two key components. One is increasing the utilization of renewable energy, and the second is energy efficient, maximizing second energy efficiency. Now, here we will focus more on renewable energy because we are talking about solar PVs. Um, so instead of just producing a lot of electricity and pushing it or and incorporating it into the grid, sending it back to the grid and get monetized for it, um, it is incentivized that you actually use this energy within the local community and still get compensated for it. And one of the reasons is when you just send it back to the grid, you have transmission and distribution losses, whereas if you use the energy locally, that loss part is minimized, and it also helps the DSOs and TSOs to plan better. If instead of individually optimizing everybody, it can then basically aggregate your consumption and requirement from the grid at a community scale. It helps them to predict better and hence make the system more stable. Um, Now, this is driven by like four key elements. One is maximizing local energy production, having a better distributed generation, as I talked about earlier in the presentation. The third component is peer-to-peer trading, and a lot of these energy communities are developing business models right now for this trading to happen, because it's easy to rely on your utility provider who provides standardized products, but this standardization has not yet happened for local P2P trading, and the energy communities actually play a big role in this, are playing a big role in standardizing this P2P trading and educating everybody like how these models work. And finally, um, it helps to actually unlock demand side flexibility. So the idea is that let's say in my area right now, I'm seeing a, 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 a demand peak, but I really don't need to actually run all my services at the same time. And I can actually probably reduce my load to help you to run your services that actually are really required to run at this time. So this interbalancing within the community, what it does is it basically unlocks demand side flexibility, which when aggregated means you have a massive peak shaving at the grid level. So this really helps the transmission service operators or the distribution system operators at a broader scale. So this adds to energy security and has much bigger consequences in a positive way. And ultimately, it leads to not only socioeconomic benefits, but it helps to democratize the energy system. So right now, if you see, like you have certain system operators, generators, and they basically force the energy system depending upon your demand, of course. But you are not deciding exactly how the system will work. Like you have control over your usage, but how the system will work depends on certain key nodes in the supply chain. But whereas when you go to a distributed system, everybody basically takes control, and in effect, it leads to energy democratization. Now, we move into the final phase of our presentation, which is the implementation phase. Now, how does the system look? So typically, if you don't have solar PVs, your system will look like the right side, let's say, okay, where you have a distribution line, and from the distribution line here, you have a one-way um, uh, transport to your house through a meter, and then through the meter you basically, like, it's running your services here. um, so this is going to be a one-way flow in this. And whatever you are using at the outlet, it all runs through the meter, and based on your usage, the meter basically counts and you get billed accordingly. Whereas when you actually implement a solar PV, what happens is here all the green lines are DC, and the red lines are AC. Uh, and so when you have a solar PV, um, you are generating DC current, or direct current, um, and that goes through some sort of optimizer or controller to charge the battery, and through the battery it goes to an inverter. The inverter then converts the DC to an AC, to AC, and then it goes to the meter. And from the meter, you have a two-way flow. You can either be pulling that current for your applications to run your devices and services, or whatever the excess is, you can decide to push it to um, the back to the grid as well. Now, you don't necessarily have to have system as complicated as that. I mean, you can choose to have a simpler system where you don't have the controller and you don't have the battery. In fact, most basic users don't have these optimizing controllers and the storages. What they will have is a solar PV system which directly connects to the inverter. And so basically right here, the DC gets converted to AC, and then it goes to the meter, and whatever you're using, and rest of it goes to gets injected to the grid. And so basically you don't have any control over actually how much you want to store for later. That control is gone because you don't have a storage system. And you can either use as much as possible of the locally produced energy, and whatever the excess is, it's just going to go to the grid. Whereas if you have a controller and a storage system, you can decide how you're going to distribute, how much of it are you going to actually store, how much you're going to use, and how much you're going to inject back into the grid at any given point of time. You can optimize this. So that is the full-scale implementation model. Now, when you decide to implement, you need to follow these steps. You first need to contact multiple developers to get quotation from them to see who's offering what. You have to check with the permit processes, and this is typically done by a developer, but it's best that you are on top of the game. So need to know the permit processes. You need to decide which season you want to actually implement. You want to implement your solar PV project, and we will talk about the details of each of these blocks in the next few slides. Um, you need to decide if you want to have an energy management system, as I described in the previous slide. And then finally, like, if you're interested in P2P energy trading, what are the procedures, what are the requirements, and the regulations in your region. So these are the main blocks to think about during the implementation phase. So from a developer quotation point of view, first of all, you should take or ask for multiple quotations from multiple developers, and aspects that you need to focus on are based on the need that you have communicated to the developer. What kind of size and technology are they offering? Uh, of course, what is the cost? And they will be giving you some calculations on return on investment as well. So this is the key economic parameter that you need to look at, like in how many years you're going to recoup the investment. Um, and then there are other offer parameters like well, I mean, what kind of maintenance service are they providing? Maybe some provide a few years of maintenance as compared to others not providing an extensive maintenance package. So those are the other parameters you need to be looking at. And one key aspect is the financial standing of the developer. You don't want to have a developer that may get broke soon, or like they don't like you need to check the financial standing of the developer. So you have access to them in future if you need to. Then for the permit process itself, you need to, of course, have a qualified installer who has all the right kind of licenses. Then you need to have a site assessment done. For structural standards, there will be some sizing limits, typically what kind of size you can maximum implement. You need to have building permits from a structural point of view. You need to have electrical permits from a point of view of connecting to your services and to the grid as well. And so that's where the approval comes in for the interconnections from the utility service provider. Uh, Typically, if you go beyond a specific size, then the requirements in terms of capacities, specific capacity, then the requirements changes from the utility side in terms of interconnection. Then you need to consider the season, because typically the solar panels work better in warmer temperature. So you probably don't want to implement in a very cold weather in the winter season, because you will not get the optimal performance from the solar panels, and then you will not know if your system is functioning properly or not. Then you will not have optimal sunlight condition either. If it's a region with that receives a lot of snow, it may not be the right period for construction and availability of your developers. And uh, and another important aspect is the incentive timeline. So typically, as I said earlier, the governments provide financial incentives, either from the national government or the local government. Now, these are not uniform throughout the year or over the years. These keep changing with time. So probably a good starting point is to look at these government websites to find out what kind of incentives are actually on the book right now. The developers usually have this kind of information, so you can consult them for this purpose as well. So if you find an incentive that actually works well with you, so you should try to implement your project within that period. Um, so and another key aspect is you should try to match this period with your energy demand as well. Again, if you are not utilizing the locally produced energy in the best possible or optimal way, then effectively it's a lost opportunity. So you want to choose the season that best fits all these kind of considerations. Now, typically, the spring and summer periods are the most common optimal periods for installing solar panels. But at the same time, it may be more difficult to find developers to actually hire um, uh, during these peak seasons. Now, for the advanced users, again, if you want to have an energy management system, it actually helps you to integrate your solar PV and maybe battery system in an optimal way. You can optimally decide how much you want to store, how much you want to trade, and how much you want to actually utilize for your own services. It helps you to maximize your energy efficiency, and it helps you to manage your load. Like again, to what extent are you going to pull from the grid, and to what extent you are going to pull from your local um, produced electricity. It also does a real-time monitoring and records all the data. So effectively, like once you have collected sufficient data over a period of time, you can get into prediction, like what is your future energy demand is going to look like, and you can also implement I mean, solar generation models that actually predicts how much the irradiation is going to be, what kind of generation you will get. So you can model both the energy production and energy demand side if you have an EMS for your specific use case. And hence, it helps you to adjust your demand response. And all this effectively leads to cost reduction, which makes the whole process more lucrative. And finally, you can get into uh, decentralized P2P energy trading. Now, something that you need to understand, there are different modes through which you can actually do this trading. The three most common ones are over the grid, partly independent microgrid, and fully independent microgrid. So over the grid, what happens is, let's say if you and I are trading, so I let's say you produce and you inject, you don't directly supply the energy to me. Whatever your excess is that you want to trade, you just inject it into the grid. And I, on the other hand, let's say I don't have any solar PV, I'm just pulling from the grid. Now, but if we are a part of the energy, if you're not a part of the energy community, it's as simple as that. You get monetized for your um, uh, injection, and I pay whatever I'm supposed to pay for the grid cost, grid electricity cost. But if we are in an energy community where we are doing P2P trading, we can still be actually physically delivering to the grid, and I'm taking from the grid, but the financial calculations will be settled in a way that as if you actually delivered the energy to me. So that there are separate regulations and charges based on the utility that we have in our area. So it is basically called over the grid model. So there's no direct physical transfer from me to you, but it's basically settled on paper. And the energy physical transfer happens over the grid, strictly over the grid. But then you have partly independent microgrids where part of it is through the grid and part of it is through an interconnection between, let's say, your production and my requirement. So our facilities are interconnected in a way that there can be a direct physical transfer from uh, uh, you to me. Um, and then you have fully independent microgrids where basically when like one of us is not connected to the grid at all, and let's say completely relying on I'm connected to your production, and I'm able to meet some of my demand, completely staying out of the grid model. So this is a fully independent microgrid. This is less common in energy communities here in Europe. Um, but the model still exists. So this can be a good example will be if you're trying to expand and you suddenly acquire the building next for your business, and you may decide not to connect it to grid at all and instead connect it to your solar PV production that you have in the previous facility, and then it basically becomes a microgrid kind of situation. Um, and again, the whole idea is it's about consumer empowerment, democratizing the decision making, like each individual um, uh, consumer have control over their energy future in terms of their production, in terms of their consumption. Uh, and this distributed and decentralized nature basically adds to the sustainability and security um, of energy. Now, lastly, once you have installed and you have a functional system, you must not forget that you should review the manufacturer's guidelines. to know your operation and maintenance steps. It is very important to keep maintaining the PV system as any other machinery. You must go through the guidelines provided by the manufacturer. You should now continue to monitor the performance, because that is an important step. Because as I talked about performance ratio earlier, it does not provide the theoretical um, energy that you may expect, but so at times it can drop significantly for certain reasons. So you must be aware of the situation. So that's why you should monitor the performance, and in case there are drops in energy production, you should know why it is happening. Cleaning is an important aspect, because a lot of times, because of dust or other things, you can, like, if the surface gets covered with something else, that actually reduces the solar irradiation on the panel itself. Like, it'll reduce the absorption capability. So you'll automatically have a suboptimal performance for the solar PV. So you should um, intermittently clean your PV surfaces in a following safety standards. Then you should inspect your PV system regularly to make sure that structurally it is sound and there are no issues. And lastly, you should check for system upgrades from time to time. If there are any firmware, software upgrades for better management of the system, you should be up to date on this. So now, coming to the last slide, I want to walk you through where we are coming from in the electricity market, and where we are heading to. So normally we are moving from a price taker model to a price setter model. This is the general trend in which the European electricity market, and in general in many other continents and countries as well, in which we are shifting. So price taker model is where we don't have any control over the price we pay for our energy use. The price is set by the higher authorities. It's typically like the wholesale market, and then you have the TSOs and DSOs who play a big role, and 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 we as end users don't have any say in how much we are paying. So we are given a price, we either take it or leave it. So that's a price taker model. But we are slowly shifting towards a price setter model, because if we generate electricity ourselves and we decide on how much we are going to consume and how much we are going to store and how much we are going to trade, then this actually decides that what is my overall, like at the larger scale, at the grid scale, what is the demand, and that decides how much the price is going to be. So effectively, uh, we are slowly transitioning towards a price setter model. Now, in the most extreme case, we generate ourselves whatever we use, and we generate extra, and we decide to sell then at a price that probably suits us at a time. We sell it at a time at a price that suits us. Now, there are a lot of legal barriers to going to a completely price setter model, but um, generally speaking, the market is moving towards from price taker to price setter. And this is a broader like elaborated image here. So on the left two blocks, you have the consumption side, that is your side. You are consuming energy, like, and then you have a load profile. These are two key aspects of your consumption: how much net energy you're consuming, over what period of time, and at any given time, what is your load profile. um, and you pull this from an energy system, and this energy system basically has, let's say, two components. One is the grid electricity, and the other one is your solar PV generation. Earlier, it was only the grid electricity that actually provides both for your energy consumption and the load that you need. but now you have solar PV generation, local solar PV generation that is actually contributing to this as well. Now, you may choose in the advanced cases, you may choose how much of the solar PV generation you want to contribute towards your real-time need and how much you want to actually store or trade, as I mentioned earlier. And then you can actually decide the level of your storage from the grid electricity directly as well, based on the electricity prices. Let's say you have sometimes negative electricity prices and or very low electricity prices. At those time, you may decide to actually charge your storage completely so that later on you want to use it. Similarly, the stored energy also you can use for P2P trading. However, this is not the most common model as of now. Some pilots are there that actually are looking into it, where you can actually not only trade your direct generation um, with your peers, but you can actually also trade the stored energy that you have, energy that you have with your peers. So this is more on a research scale from a business model point of view and more at a pilot scale. But I expect that in future, all these things will be allowed in a fully liberalized way. And here in this diagram, each of these arrows basically has a monetary implication. Like, so each flow here has a monetary value. And earlier, um, there was just like a single arrow from grid to your energy consumption. So you could not, unless and until you change your demand, you cannot really change the price because you take what you get. But now with all this distribution, a lot of it now depends on you, how you're going to actually use your energy, from where you're going to source, how you're going to use it. And each of these are going to have separate markets and separate monetary evaluation. So based on the monetary evaluations, you can make the best choice, most optimal choice for yourself. So this is where the global, electricity market, especially in Europe, is going, from a price taker model to a price setter model. And lastly, so what do you do with this? Hopefully, I have been able to convince you with a lot of benefits of having solar PVs of your own. At least you will be more interested to look into it if you have not in the past, and at least learn more about how adopting solar PV can actually help your business. Now, once you have learned this, I would request you to actually help others to go through the same process so that they can come up to your level in the learning curve as well. Help your peers, and don't just stop there. Stay curious and think about what are you going to do next. Like, once you keep yourself up to date, think about what's coming ahead in your business in terms of regulations in your region, and how can you actually best contribute to the society in terms of decarbonization, environmental sustainability, and in general supporting others in your community. So with this, thank you very much. I hope this presentation was helpful to you. And at the very least, I hope it will help you to be motivated enough to actually start looking into what are your opportunities and options. With this, thank you very much.